Ladies and gentlemen, this is my great pleasure. Welcome everybody for this new and traditional seminar organized together with Institute of Anthropology, Russian Academy of Science. And let me welcome once again Professor Emeritus, New Mexico State University, Andrew Wigeta. As far as I understand, you stay in Moscow. Is it correct?
That's correct. I'm in Moscow.
Yeah, great. But this is a great chance for everybody, for our students, for those who join our program that we have together. University of Nizhny Novgorod, State University of Nizhny Novgorod, and Institute of Anthropology, Russian Academy of Science. And let's start and let's enjoy once again such an interesting, unusual topic. And I hope, as usual, at the end, we can get several interesting questions, and I'm really eager to hear answers on those questions. So let's start and let's have a great joy and to be in deep for new knowledge. And Professor Wigeta, the floor is yours, or screen is yours, or camera is yours. So welcome.
Thank you, Mikhail. So we try, there's some pieces of video in this presentation, and we may have to go back and forth between the PowerPoint and the video, and that may take a little adjustment, so I ask everybody to be patient. The topic today that I want to speak about is bear ceremonialism. This is a topic that we've been working on, myself and my wife and colleague Olga Balalaeva, for the past 13 years. And before I go into that in some great detail, we ought to explain a little bit what bear ceremonialism is. So there are some common features. The word universally has been used, and it's an awful word actually, because there really aren't any universal features. But basically what bear ceremonialism involves is a ritual hunting for the bear, a ritual ceremony to receive the bear in the village and in the house, followed by a ritual meal, and then some ritual way of disposing of the head, the skull, the bones, and the skin. The problem with making generalizations, the first problem is that they are in fact generalizations of a very high order that overlook important local cultural differences. The second problem is that such generalizations are really ahistorical, because the dates and the conditions of field work have varied enormously. For some communities in the circumpolar region, we have data going back to the 18th century. For some, we have only very recent data, and for others, very little in between. We know nothing, virtually nothing, about what these communities are experiencing today. And so to make some assumptions that because this documentation existed, say, in 1920, and we cannot assume that these practices are still continuing today. Conditions have changed and the communities have changed significantly. Bear ceremonialism received enormous amount of anthropological interest almost from the time it was publicly introduced to the English-speaking world, with a survey by A.I. Hallowell that was published in American Anthropologist in 1926. It was, in fact, his doctoral dissertation. And what impressed everybody almost immediately was the broad circumpolar distribution of bare ceremonialism, which in the era of Franz Boas raised a lot of questions about the historical connections among these peoples and these traditions. There was also phenomenal interest about the complex ritual structure and the relationship between the folklore and the ritual and then current ideas about totemism. After the war, there was some exploration of the function of bare ceremonialism, both its biocultural function in supposedly providing for securing food and resources, and the structural functionalism in terms of trying to locate different segments of the community population in relationship to each other. For a long time, bare ceremonialism fell out of interest, and the principal reason for that was number one, a lack of access to Eurasian sources by American anthropologists. We didn't have access to Russia. There was the language barrier that persisted. The second thing, too, was that people had moved past this idea of Boasian diffusionism. We were much more focused on ethnographic studies of individual communities. But the interest has returned, especially as since 1985 or so, there's been increasing interest in traditional ecological knowledge and in what has been called the ontological turn in anthropology, that is, the understanding that there are different culturally distinct ways of understanding what it means to be a person, and would include everything from animals to stones to mountains to rivers, depending on which community you're talking about, as living beings that have personal agency and so forth. And finally, since we are in an era of tremendous rapid cultural change, there's been concern with bare ceremonialism as a means for ethnic identification, self-identification, and for how bare ceremonialism becomes an important element in tradition and heritage. So most recently, the concern has been over processes of cultural change and the role that bare ceremonialism plays in community ethnic identification. If we look at that broad circumpolar distribution of bare ceremonies, we find out that there are, in fact, a number of different traditions and sub-traditions. And many of these are, I know from personal communication with ethnographers today and with others, many of these are practically extinct. That's certainly true in the case of Altai, the Tungusic, Altai Evenk, with the Amur Pacific tradition, which involves the Ainu and the Amur peoples, and with the Finno-Scandian tradition. Very vital tradition is the Ab-Ugrian tradition, which I will talk about a bit later. In North America, as far as I know, and we'll show a bit of video later, the Algonquian and Northern Athabascan traditions are still practiced, though how much is not known at this point. Let's talk briefly about these traditions. So the Amur Pacific tradition of the Ainu, the Nifki, and the other Nanai and Orochi peoples of the Russian Far East, is distinguished by having two different ritual traditions. The tradition well known of raising a young bear cub for 3 years or so, 2 to 3 years, until it is ready to be ritually killed, and this followed by an elaborate ceremony. The other is especially among the Nivki, is the celebration of the hunted bear, and this is a photograph from Sternberg. In the east and south of Siberia, in Altai and what is today southern Yakutia and central Siberia, we find Evenk and Altais and Kets traditions. These are Tofalar and Evenk and Ket. Almost all of these, as far as I know, these traditions in communicating with contemporary ethnographers exist only in fragmentary form today. The Finno-Scandian tradition put a strong emphasis on gender and on the role of the bear in relationship to fertility and sexual prowess and reproduction. The image at the top of the screen with the bear and the woman is a staged image, but in the Finnish tradition, there is documentation of bear ceremonies as wedding feasts. In Sami, there's also a tradition that sees bears as very strong markers of gender identity and very distinctive in this respect. The most elaborate tradition today in Eurasia is the Ab-Ugrian tradition of the Hanti and Mansi, which was maintained throughout the Soviet period, though rather in secret up until, say, the 80s, when they began to permit it to be performed in public. This is a ceremony about which I'll talk more later. There are significant regional differences here, but all of these ceremonies involve elaborate dances, masked folk drama skits, many songs, and ritual elements. In North America, the two most prominent traditions are the Northern Athabascan tradition, which centers in Western Canada and the interior of Alaska, and the Northeast Algonquian tradition, which is basically among the Cree and Naskapi and others. Now, this is information basically from 1980, because very little formal work has been done on this tradition, I think, since then. I'm going to have to dip out of the PowerPoint presentation here to load up these films, which is always held in a clear spot in the forest, and which is considered by them a kind of a funeral for the bear. And one of the things that comes up frequently is the relationship between the way in which human communities celebrate the bear and think about the bear, and how they think about other members, human members of their own community. Why study bear ceremonialism today? I think there are three main areas that are worth considering. First, bear ceremonialism raises lots of questions of a historical nature. This goes all the way back to the very beginning of the concern with bear ceremonialism. One of the questions has to do, of course, with the relationship between all of these different traditions. how much was borrowed, how much was carried over. Some of these traditions are very, very similar, and yet the only way that they could have gotten as far as, say, Labrador or northern Quebec from Central Asia is that perhaps they were part of the mental baggage that some of the first people brought to the Western Hemisphere. Another question is, what is the relationship between specific bear ceremonial practices, like hanging skulls on trees, for instance, bear skulls on trees, and other ritual hunting practices, like ritually hanging the skulls of different animals? All of these are questions of historical importance, having to do with the way in which we as human beings relate to what we call the natural world, but which is really just our world, the world that we share with other beings. There are also some important archaeological questions that address this history, that go back quite a ways. There used to be a time when people thought that there was a very old cave bear cult. This is no longer an acceptable archaeological theory. However, we are still finding important elements of ritual treatment of bears from the Neolithic period and even into the relatively recent pre-contact period. I would invite you, if you have a chance, to take a look at two new books, one in English, one in Russian, about relatively recent, that is, in our era, historical archaeological finds. Very interesting to me, for instance, is the find illustrated here in the center from a site near Lake Baikal, Shamanka Dva. This site dates to about 8,000 years before the present, where we find bear penis bones in association with human graves. It's a unique assemblage in North Eurasian archaeology. And yet what it says is that as early as 8,000 BP, that bears played an important role in the development of symbolic behavior among human beings. And lastly, of course, also part of the historical process are the dynamics of erosion and extinction and revival of tradition, which are still being played out all across the North. And what do they tell us about how human beings select those elements, the human communities select those elements that remain important as identity symbols as they experience dramatic cultural change. We mentioned earlier the idea of bears as other than human persons, that in indigenous communities it is not so that one makes a rigid distinction between the natural world and the human world of culture, that many beings in what Westerners call the natural world are persons who have agency, who have intentionality, and who have social relations. And so how we understand our relationship to bears and to those other than human persons defines who we are, because our personhood is relational. It doesn't exist in an absolute dimension. So it's very important to explore how different communities understand their relations to bears and to other persons other than human persons. The third element that makes studying bear ceremonialism especially important today is that we have developed a new appreciation of the role of human beings as human persons as part of larger, more complex social ecological systems. Especially valuable here has been the understanding of traditional ecological knowledge. And we begin to see that in many communities across the north, the bear serves as what one anthropologist called a key symbol, that is, a symbol that articulates relationships between many different elements within the world around us, and provides meaning and understanding of how to relate to those other aspects of the world around us. So as we look at bears, for instance, we also begin to see that there might be ways in which bears function as what are called cultural keystone species, that, as the quotation at the top says, shape the cultural identity of a people and are fundamental in relationship to their diet, their medicine, or their spiritual practices. The notion of cultural keystone species is an important concept in contemporary ecology and conservation studies, but it's a difficult one to kind of precisely articulate. But it does require a close interaction between and a dialogue between Western so-called objective science and indigenous communities and their worldview, because in fact there is a relationship that we have with all beings in the world in which we live and move. And it's quite certain, I think fairly well established, that indigenous worldview can offer us Westerners a better understanding, or let's just say a complementary understanding of how we can interact with the world around us. These relations are based on observations of behaviors and that characterize certain certain other than human persons as persons. And so this close observation and engagement with bears and other than human persons can speak to
Yeah, Dr. Wigeta,
strategies.
Excuse me, please.
Yes.
Can you share your slides?
Oh, they're not being
We
shared?
can't see
I'm
your
sorry.
presentation.
Come on.
It works? Okay.
Can you see that now?
Yes.
Okay. Let me go. I was just going back to finishing up. I'm sorry. Back and forth between the PowerPoint and the videos, I sometimes get myself lost. So I was finishing up by talking about the importance of understanding bear ceremonialism in relationship to traditional ecological knowledge and cultural and ecological conservation. As anthropologists, we're interested in a number of different things, but how to think about bear ceremonialism. Remember, we talked about it having at least 4 basic components: a ritual or traditional way of hunting bears. Secondly, a ritual way of celebrating the bear in the village. Third, a ritual feasting, and 4, a way of finally disposing of the bear parts like bones and skull and so forth. One way to think about these is to think about bear ceremonials as sending home rituals, which are the kind of rituals that are used to ensure the return of animals every year. Like the first salmon ceremony that's indicated here at the top. As wonderful, and that's a very good analogy. The problem, of course, as is often pointed out, is that bears are usually not food animals, animals hunted for consumption. And most of these sending home rituals are addressed to those kinds of animals, like salmon, whales, deer, and so forth. So that's one element. Another way to think about bear ceremonialism is to think about them in terms of a world renewal ritual. This, of course, makes some sense if we think about bears as this kind of elaborate key symbol that helps you or helps communities organize relationships between different categories of experience. And then those relationships are renewed or made present again in the ceremony. And there's certainly some element of that associated with bear ceremonialism, which is often involves prayers or songs for the renewal of the community, for the health of people, for the provision of food, and so forth. And a third way of thinking about bear ceremonialism is as some kind of rite of passage. If we think about bears as other than human persons, if they are affirmed as persons within a social relationship to the human community, then it would make sense to think that they would be treated as persons and be given some of the same ritual framing for important moments in their lives that human persons have. And so, for instance, in the Finnic tradition, there's a very strong association of bears with weddings and with funerals. We have bear burials. We have bears, ceremonialism being associated with the notion of a wake, which is the celebration of the life of a person in front of the dead person. So there are ways to think about bear ceremonialism as a rite of passage for a person, just like a human person. How did we get into all of this? We got into all of this because Olga Balalaeva and myself started working in 1992 in Hanti-Mansi Krug, south of Surgut, in an area called the Yukon River Basin, Bolshoi Yukon River Basin. And most of these people at that time were traditional hunters and fishermen and trappers. They maintained their traditional religion, though inroads have been made recently by evangelical Christians, and their traditional economy has been subverted to some degree by oil company compensation agreements. But I'll have to cut out of this a bit and show you just what we're talking about, the types of people that we're talking about here. See that now?
Yeah.
Can you see that video?
Yes, sure.
Yes.
So here they are checking the trap line. They trap sables. They live in an area that is very densely forested, high forest and swamps. So there are a lot of
Лен, где Маш, у тебя пузырек?
Чай.
Ну все.
Вот ту железку дай.
Вот так уберешь, а вот так не получается.
Но.
Okay. Are we now sharing the screen again?
Always okay.
Okay. So one of the things that we did beginning in 1992, because this is the area of Russia's greatest oil reserves and petroleum development, we spent a lot of time in the 1990s documenting the cultural landscape on the Yugon. We did work in community organizing, helping communities to develop their charters, linking them with legal and professional expertise, connecting them with public support. And probably the most important thing was helping them imagine alternatives, because this was a time of great change. We did some community development work and trying to connect indigenous people and leaders in Siberia with those in the United States that we knew. We brought Duma members over to meet tribal leaders. We brought young people across on both sides in a cultural exchange. We did ethno-historical documentation, which surprisingly, a lot of things have not been done. So not only did we find old photographs from archives and repatriate them, but we had a very small and quite spontaneous project to copy family photographs, which was extremely valuable. And of course, we did folklore and folk life documentation, songs, dances, music, storytelling, and found a picture on one Sträubischer, one yurt of bear ceremony. Because of all these other activities, we did not spend much time thinking about bear ceremonialism. We were too concerned about rapid change environment affecting the traditional economy and the impact of new technologies and Western religious practices, new government policies, and so forth. Recently, Olga Balalaeva has published a book called Golasa Yugana about some of the, which includes some of the texts in Hanti and in Russian that were recorded back then. But we became interested in the second, let's say 2005, 2006, as it became really obvious that the Bear Festival throughout Hanti-Mansi Okrug had become what Edward Spicer called an identity symbol. That is, a symbol which calls forth sentiments, affirmations of belief on the part of individuals that they are part of a collective identity system. And this was part of the revival of ethnic consciousness in Hanti-Mansi Okrug that began in the late 80s. Its real formal beginning was the opening of the Torah Ma Museum in 1989 in Hanti-Mansi, and a commitment to making traditional culture widely available. And so bear festivals were produced throughout the region, and the Bear Festival became part of the public consciousness of what it meant to be an Abugrian. The problem with that, of course, is that there is no such thing as the Bear Festival. And so as we looked at the festivals that were being produced and put on television, it was obvious that there were significant regional differences, and that these regional differences were being promoted in such a way that marginalized groups like the Yugon Hanti felt themselves overlooked and in some ways culturally submerged in the attentions and the funding given to other groups. So this was not just an academic question, because where cultural politics shapes funding and identity image, there are real unfortunate social consequences for these marginalized communities. I remember one young Yugon Hanti woman, she had worked in the Dom Cultura, which is the kind of cultural education system in these communities. And she had worked in the Yugon, and she had attended one of these Northern Hanti festivals, and her comment to me on the way out was, "Oh my God, how much we have lost," without even beginning to understand that it wasn't that they had lost things. They never had those traditions, but they were being promoted as the Hanti Bear Festival. And what the Yugon tradition was, she didn't know. And so she thought that what she saw was a reflection of all that they had lost. So we began to undertake a process of trying to support the Yugon Hanti. We had funding from UNESCO to create a cultural heritage media center to provide some technology to them, to create a website for the community. That website is indicated at the bottom of the slide there. You can go there. It's bilingual in Russian and in English. And to create a master apprenticeship program where we would bring older singers to work with a young apprentice to learn some of the songs, because a bear festival in the Yugon is a very, very complex process. We had funding from UNESCO's Office of Information Technologies in Moscow to do this, and it enabled us to support the performance of one Hanti Bear Festival in 2010 on the Yukon. And then in 2016, the community itself sponsored their own. Before that 2010 festival, we had an expedition that went down the Bolshoi-Yukon River, which is about literally 800 kilometers by boat miles, and stopping at all the Stoibishers and talking to people about bear ceremonies and about their memories of them, when they last participated in them, what they knew about bears, and so on and so forth. Part of our motive for this was that this gentleman here, Petr Vasilyevich Kurlamkin, who had been our primary consultant and dear friend for more than 25 years, was aging rapidly and had suffered a stroke. And he and another man were the only two knowledgeable bear festival singers on the Yukon River. The other man had died, and Petr Vasilyevich said that he could not sing anymore without his companion. And so basically there were no singers for a community of 850 people in a vast area of nearly 2 million hectares. So this tradition was literally on the verge of dying out. I think we bought it a little bit of breathing time, a little bit of space, but it's still a fragile tradition there. What I want to do now is to show you a bit of video that kind of lays out the Yukon Hanti bear ceremony from 2010 and the one from 2016. I've edited them together and put the dates in the frame so you know which video cadre is from which event. Пупи идет. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Can you see that video?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. We started from the beginning here. Пупи идет.
Да, это один раз. Тем хор надо, да? Где? Хор уже да упасть. Ина. Ясно. Новую тоже гостю. Попробуй там. Он вижу, подожмите его туда.
Поярче такие. Вот. Там просто пурita, там капури.
Не туда попал. Я тоже боюсь. Много не
Писанные, суточные.
Один маленький, тут
В Африке они могут такие рисования. По-разному. Тут просто я говорю о том, что...
Все убирайте, на нас нужно все. Вот палочку эту, царапину палочку белую.
О, мы тебя колотить уже начинаем, пока ты надо, чтобы пойдет. Что-то быстро
Вот так один. Дома же вот так. Уже ясно.
Что, тащить его прямо?
И там было ясно, да. Память, да.
Joskus kun joku kaniikki, se on kuitenkin enemmän nuisi, jos se pupi nuisi imukuivan. Och se joku kaniikki, men nuotinen panna, nuotin ominen panna sajuutuu, lyös nukas me sajuutuu. No mun tukko se sajuutuu, mun käspä.
Тёшка, не подсказывай. Поэтому урона, поэтому.
Я так не могу. Ну а как?
Тёшка,
Okay, thank you. I hope I'm back to the PowerPoint presentation. So right now, we have a grant that from the National Science Foundation. We have more than 311 gigabytes of video, 93 hours of 7 different Obugrian bear festivals, with an enormous body of material, including 77 songs, actually altogether almost 300 songs, all 7. Some of these songs are very long, up to 30 minutes long. So we are patiently trying to transcribe these songs, especially the Eastern Hanti songs, which have never been transcribed and or translated into Russian or English. We are asking Hanti to comment on the nature of the performance, on the text, and on human-bear relationships. And we're preparing publications on the questions we had talked about earlier in regards to history, ontology, ecology, and the social value of bear ceremonialism. We hope to get to Canada and the United States later this year or next year if the pandemic permits us to do so. The grant also provides us with funds to set up a publicly accessible, media-rich, bilingual website on bear ceremonialism. We've done this with Indigenous collaboration. And let's see if I can get there with this. Yeah, you can see this now, I think. So this is the website, and as you see, it's bilingual, Russian and English. And it is a very, very rich website in terms of what it provides, not only in terms of describing communities, but also distinctive elements of their bear ceremonies. For example, this is a 1995 bear ceremony we have access to, video of. This is the song to Wake the Bear. And so this song has been transcribed and translated into from Hanti into Russian and then into English. And I would point out to you that this is not a short song. I think it's well over 200 lines. So this is the kind of material that we are using. This website also has video with subtitles in Russian and in English. So this is the work that we are doing now, to continue to transcribe, translate, and interpret the songs for this very, very underreported and underserved Yugon Eastern Hanti population. And we hope to make larger comparisons and analyses on a regional, Eurasian, and then finally circumpolar scale. So with that, I'm going to stop and let you all ask whatever questions that you wish. Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are ready for your questions. Please identify yourself, or you can use a chat or turn on the mic. There are some questions in chat.
All right, so let me see if I can get that.
Sure. Yeah, you can do it.
In the male and female bears are treated differently, and this is even more true among the Yugon Hanti, Eastern Hanti. So female bears are celebrated for 4 days, male bears for 5 days. You saw this kind of grid-like construction, we call it a house kutikot, which is for females made of 4x4 strips of wood, for males 5x5 strips of wood. Male bears do not wear beads, that's for females. So they're very, very conscious of treating male and female bears differently. Also, there are, as throughout the North, gender restrictions on which parts of the bear women may eat and which parts men may eat. Universally, men only can eat the heart, the liver, the forepaws, the ribs, and anything from the neck and the head of the bear. Women, the back part, usually. So I don't know what else I might say. It's also true, by the way, that even in the songs, and this is why it's so important to translate and transcribe the songs, even in the songs there are significant gender differences associated with the bears. So very, very important gender differences.
Stepan, you have a rising hand. You have a question?
Yes, I have.
Go ahead.
Professor Wigget, thank you so much for the lecture. I study medieval Latin bestiaries, and there are usually classical story derived from Pliny the Elder about she-bear and blind cubs and the similarity between bears and humanity. You were saying about symbolic meaning of a bear, but how was a bear described? And could we say about the similar place of a bear in the worldview as the king of animals, like a lion in European culture?
That's a good question. First of all, almost everybody in North America and in Eurasia acknowledges that the basic biological fact that when you skin a bear, it looks a lot like a human being underneath. They also treat bears as if they are persons. And that means you can talk to a bear, that the bear can understand what you're saying, that the bear has to be treated with respect as you would treat any powerful person that you met in your world. There's a special language for talking about bears. It is true that throughout the forested part of the circumpolar north, the Tayuzhny chest of the north, that the bear really does have that function, that place at the top of the pyramid of animals, if you will. Though they don't really think of it as a pyramid. The bear is Hosannism, but there are particular animal masters for different species. But the bear is clearly the most significant creature. I don't know about lion. Historically, this is a very, very interesting question, archaeologically too. You mentioned Pliny. What we do know is that bears were important even in classical European culture, from both the Greeks and the Romans. The festival of Brauron and so forth in Greece, Artemis's festival. And of course, its role in mythology continues even through the Middle Ages and so forth. I'm less interested myself in Europe than I am in the farther north, the Taiga North. But obviously there are very, very old connections. There's a woman who's doing some very interesting work, a scholar in the United States named Rosalind Frank. There's a young Finnish-Italian, Vesa Pilidou, who's doing remarkable work, a lot of work being done in Italy on European traditions associated with bear and how those are still maintained to the present.
Thank you very much.
Question?
yeah, sure. Thank you.
Okay.
We have one more question on chat. And
in chat, let's see, where are you?
Yeah.
Obviously, some people missed the question, missed some slides. I'm sorry about that. Elements of traditional bear ceremonies spread into other contemporary indigenous cultural practices, music, literature, visual, or performance art. That's a very good question. Certainly in literature, yes, because I know for a fact that both Yuvan, in Western Siberia, both Yuvan Shestalov and Yeremy Ipin have written literature in which the traditional bear festival plays an important role. There's it's difficult for me to say. Part of I can't confidently speak much beyond that. I do know that there's tremendous interest in bear ceremonialism, both in Finland and in Japan, but the actual traditions themselves are not practiced anymore. So what we're looking at or thinking about is really something like interpretation of those practices or representing those ideas in literature. That's all that I can add to that.
Thanks. Do we have more questions?
Anything?
Yeah, one more on chat.
Thank you, Yulia. Very interesting question about the role that women play in bear festivals. Here again, this is one of those cases where the Eastern Hanti seem to be significantly different from Mansi and Northern Hanti, because Mansi and Northern Hanti provide no role for women other than in dancing, kind of social women's dance to music, but no ritual role, no place in the function. Eastern Hanti seem to have permitted, not necessarily encouraged, but permitted women to sing before the bear. On 2 occasions, we had a very knowledgeable Eastern Hanti woman pray publicly and make a lament sitting on the floor in front of the bear. So in terms of specific ritual actions, that's quite limited. On the other hand, the women are absolutely essential in terms of preparing and conducting the ceremony within the space of the household or the village, and providing the food and making sure that, as you saw in the bit of the video, that if it's a female bear, that the bear is dressed appropriately in the fanciest materials, so that there is this role for women to play as well. But they are not permitted to touch the bear during the ceremony, and even afterwards. It's a very it's too potent, it's too powerful a reality for them to deal with. And this is not unusual, by the way, in hunting cultures, to have restrictions between women's behaviors and men who are hunters, as if the spheres of life and life-giving and death-producing are entirely to be kept separate.
Okay, do we have more questions? Yeah, please.
Hi, can I have a question? Hi, it's Anna Vanichkin here. I'd like to ask a question about the counting stick we saw in the ceremony.
Yeah.
Is it what's the function of it? I understand that it's counting songs and some parts of the ceremony. Is it done for each ceremony, or is it something that is kept from ceremony to ceremony, from occasion to occasion? And how often do they use counting sticks in their practices?
Okay, the counting stick, the shotny palchki, is new for each event, is made new for each event. Its principal function is to keep track of the songs and skits and stories. It's not unique. Well, let me stop. Bear Festival counting sticks are a unique genre of counting sticks, but the use of a stick which is notched to keep track of things is not new, or is not restricted among the Hanti to bear festivals. We have several stories about a kind of a prophet who traveled in the Eastern Hanti region, who used such a stick with notches on it as a mnemonic device to help him remember certain things that he needed to say when he visited every stoibish. So, and even generally speaking, in Russia, merchants used counting sticks, and there's photos of them from the past. You can find them online. So, but in terms of the Bear Festival counting stick, this 4-sided counting stick with the bear's head carved on the end notched on the sides is a specific stick made just for that particular event. It's kept by the host of the event after the event as a kind of memento or remembrance of the event.
So it's, and you know how many notches you should make to complete the ceremony, right? So
well,
it's
that's
kind of a
different
sign of complete ceremony.
Yeah, no, I would not say that. You do have to keep track of each thing, but the ceremony is not complete by virtue of reaching a certain number. The ceremony is complete when the bear says it's complete. And the bear lets you know because there are various types of divination, such as lifting the table that the bear is on, that will decide whether or not the bear has been sufficiently entertained. So,
okay, so the number of notches for each ceremony depends on the bear.
Depends on the bear, depends on the ceremony. Yes, it varies from ceremony to ceremony.
From ceremony to ceremony. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
You have one more question from Rosalind Frank about the impact of your research on Khanty language.
Hello, Rosalind. Where are you online? Wonderful. Okay, Rosalind. I don't know if Rosalind's online, but Rosalind, I hope you're online because we have somebody else had asked a question about European traditions, and I wanted to connect them to you. I think right now it has not yet had the effect that it will have when the publications are made generally available. This is, as you probably know, this is an enormous task. And what we are trying to do is to transcribe, literally write down the Khanty texts from listening to the oral recordings. Transcribe the Khanty texts in the original, what is now the conventional Eastern Khanty font or schrift, then translating them with the help of Khanty consultants into Russian, and then translating them into English. So this is an enormously time-consuming job, but in fact, I think it will have in the long run a tremendous impact because there are no Eastern Khanty texts available, and that's for sure. So making these available, unlike Northern Khanty, unlike Mansi, unlike a lot of other indigenous languages in Russia, there are no Eastern Khanty texts available even to Khanty, except in the form of small uchebniki, basic first grade level lexics. So I think it will have an impact in the long run.
Thank you very much. I think this presentation and lecture is a really great impact because our participants do communicate with each other, sharing comments and ideas. And finally, we have one more question at the end. Can you read it?
I've got one from Andrei Filchenko, and I see one from
from Andrei, just a comment to Stepan, but at the last one. But you can comment on
about evangelicals. John, if that's John Harrison, let me just make a comment. First of all, we have a very extensive article on this, on the role of Pятидесятники and evangelical Baptists among the Khanty. They are successful. It depends really on a number of different reasons, but I'd be happy to make that article available to anybody who contacts me by email. That article was published in Sibirica about 4 or 5 years ago, I think. And yes, Andre, the bear is addressed as brother, but sometimes also grandfather, sometimes simply Mishenka. So that's a very intimate kind of relationship. And one of the things that we notice is that with the younger generation, I'm talking about young men under 30, there is not much of that respect for the bear that comes to the older generation. They are much more likely to be sport hunters. They are much more likely to hunt bears in order to get some financial gain from the bear. So there is a generational difference that's worth paying attention to. It's also worth saying that the older generation today would have been about 30 when we started our field work. So they're not that old. Okay.
Okay, yes, I think that's it. And at the end, ladies and gentlemen, let me thank Professor Andrew Wigeta for such an interesting lecture. And dear participants, thank you for joining us. We have participants from several universities, not only from Russia, but as far as I understand, from United States and Canada. And this is a real example of academic cooperation. And thank you. I'd like to thank our students. This is a great experience for them, and hope to see or to listen everybody on our next meeting, because this project organized by Lobachevsky University together with Institute of Anthropology, Russian Academy of Science will continue. Stay safe, and once again, thank you everybody for participation. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Mikhail.
Thank you.